Butt's getting sore.
Yeah, mine too, actually.
Hey, my butt's sore.
Is that recorded?
It is. You're always on camera here. You gotta remember that.
Oops. Stop picking your nose.
Alrighty. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Unfolding Revelation podcast series, which is produced in partnership with Wayfarers Christian Church and Mid-South Christian College. My name is Nick Griffin. I'm the lead pastor at Wayfarers Christian Church, and I am joined today on my left first by our apocalyptic adventurer and Revelation superfan. I would say also the Bible superfan, Zach House.
Hey.
I threw everybody off by going to Zach first.
I know.
I like to keep it fresh. On the right, the person who usually gets introduced first, our podcasting professor and fellow Revelation superfan, Greg Waddell.
Hey, everybody. I feel like I've been demoted.
I just like to keep it fresh, keep everybody on their toes. I've wondered a few times if people just cut out my intros and put them all right next to each other, would I just say the exact same thing? I'm curious.
A lot of people, of YouTubers do.
Yeah, it's
exactly the same.
It's like same pacing and everything. So yeah. I'm gonna change it up. Gotta keep you guys on your toes. If this is your first time listening to this podcast series, I'd encourage you to go back and check some of our previous episodes where we lay a little bit of the groundwork for how we are interpreting the book of Revelation. And some of our thoughts on some of the first few chapters. We're just taking it chapter by chapter, looking at the book, trying to understand what it means and how God wants to speak to us through that book. Especially for today, I think it would be helpful for you to go back and listen to the intro episodes, the 4 intro episodes at the very beginning, because today we are in chapter 6, which is a chapter that is got some famous imagery in it, imagery that you're like, oh yeah, I've seen that before, I've heard of that before. And because of that, because it's famous, because it's well known, we tend to have a lot of assumptions about what it means. And today we're going to be looking at, are those assumptions correct? Are we looking at this in the right way? So before we do anything else, let's read the chapter. Zach?
It's my turn? I thought it was your turn.
I think it is your turn. Is it my turn?
I think it's... Well,
what do you think, Greg? Is it my turn?
actually, I think you did, and then he did last, and it should be mine, I guess.
No, you definitely did last.
Did I?
Yeah.
Well, then it would be, because it's going this way, right?
Yeah.
Okay, then it's my turn. Never mind.
It's going clockwise.
I'm just going to keep all this in here because this is funny. Just so you guys know, we're not as polished.
We're not as organized as
the editing may make you think. So it's my turn. I'm going to read chapter 6 then. I'm reading from the NIV here. Chapter 6 starts. As I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown. And he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. When the Lamb opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature say, "Come." Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. When the Lamb opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages. And do not damage the oil and the wine. When the Lamb opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over a 1/4 of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. When he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain, because the word of God and the testimony they had maintained. They called out in a loud voice, "How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?" Then each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to wait a little longer until the full number of their fellow servants, their brothers and sisters, were killed just as they had been. I watched as he opened the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloths made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to earth, as figs drop from a fig tree, shaken by a strong wind. The heavens receded like a scroll, being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free, hid in caves among the rocks of the mountains. They called to the mountains and the rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath had come, and who can withstand it?" Mm-hmm. So, this is where Revelation starts to get a little more
gloss over
violent.
it.
A little more violent, we would say.
Yeah.
Suddenly we have violence, and we have some famous characters that you may have heard of referenced before. These four horsemen. You may have heard the term the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and if you've heard that, this is where they come from. It's from chapter 6 of the book of Revelation. But as we were talking beforehand, getting ready for this episode, we realized it's not just in Revelation that you have four horsemen. We actually found that there are references to four horsemen that come up in Ezekiel and in Zechariah. So, as with many of the things we've seen in the book of Revelation, John is being shown imagery that it's not new to him. This isn't the first time we've ever seen four horsemen. It's a common symbol that has come up in other prophetic books. So, any faithful reader of the scriptures who was coming to this book would have been like, "Oh yeah, I know that reference. I've seen that before. I've seen four horsemen before." But definitely, the most famous four horsemen are here in chapter 6 of Revelation. Now, each of these horsemen kind of represents a different thing. And what we found when we were getting ready to start this episode recording is that, like I mentioned at the beginning, some of our assumptions about what these may mean may not be the same. So sometimes it's helpful to actually say out loud how a lot of people have interpreted this and maybe how we're looking at it specifically. So, as we were doing a little bit of research beforehand, the most common interpretation, it seems like, in America and evangelical circles for the four horsemen, and especially for the first horseman, is that it is reference to what you may have heard of as the Antichrist. It's important to mention here something Greg says all the time. The Antichrist. It's like Voldemort, he who must not be named. A good point that Greg mentioned, though, is that this never says that in this passage. It never actually says Antichrist. That term never comes up. And it actually never comes up in Revelation, is something we talked about. The Antichrist term never comes up in Revelation. So important, whatever your beliefs are, if you think that this is the Antichrist, you got to do some interpretation to defend that. And because of that, because for a lot of traditional evangelical American Christians, the first horseman is this Antichrist character coming in to conquer the earth and sort of unite all of these nations against God's people. The following horsemen opening these seals being opened, these horsemen coming, and these terrible things coming is a sign of the start of a time of tribulation, of judgment on the earth, and of like lots of horrible things happening that coincides with sort of the rise of the reign of the Antichrist. That's how most people looked at the book. As we started to talk, Greg was like, "That's not how I look at it at all." So we thought it would be helpful for Greg to give us a little bit of an overview. How have you looked at this as our resident Revelation superfan?
Well, I see that language of the one riding the white horse. He has a crown on his head. And also the language is he came forth conquering and to conquer. This to me is a reference to Christ.
So not the Antichrist.
Not the Antichrist,
but Christ
but
himself.
The true Christ. He has a crown. He's been crowned. He's the king, meaning and we find in the previous chapters that Jesus now reigns. He has ascended to heaven. He's sitting on the throne with the Father. He comes forth to the idea of conquering and to be conquered. We should not forget that whatever idea that brings up in our minds, that is terminology that just recently was used in the book, in the first, in chapter 2 and chapter 3, when he was talking to the churches in Asia. He says that to the one who conquers, I will grant him to eat of the tree of life. That's in 2:7. To the one who conquers, he will not be hurt by the second death. That's 2:11. To the one who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna. 2:17. The one who conquers and who keeps my works will, until the end, I will give him authority over the nations. That's 2:26. The one who conquers will be clothed in white garments. That's in 3:5. And then here, and the one who conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. And then we come to this text. And there was one more. To the one who conquers, I will grant him to sit with me on the throne. And this text says that he came forth conquering and to conquer. So the term is directly linked to something positive, to something that Christians ought to do, and not as something wicked as you would expect from a Antichrist. So
that's about as opposite as you could look at what this first horseman is.
Also, we might want to mention,
but that's good evidence
the
for
fact that in chapter 19, what is it? What is the verse? Chapter 19, we have this one who is riding on a white horse again. Let me just look that up real quick.
Yeah, there's another reference to a white horse and someone riding on a white horse.
Yeah,
and in that one, it's clearly
talking
Christ.
about Christ.
Yeah.
The chapter 19, verse 11. Then I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and the one sitting on it called Faithful and True, and with righteousness he judges and makes war. Interesting, conquering, the same idea, conquering. And his eyes are like a flame of fire, and on his head are many diadems. There you have the crown, and he has a name written that no one knows, and he is clothed with a robe that's been dipped in blood, and his name is the Word of God. That's obviously Christ.
Right. There's only one Word of God.
Word of God.
And that would be Christ. So, and it might also be helpful to reference that from what little bit of research I did, historically speaking, for large swaths of church history, this first horseman was most closely connected with Jesus and with maybe the gospel or the good news. The interpretation of this first horseman as the Antichrist, historically, as far as I know, the first reference isn't until the 1800s. And it does become, then it becomes very popular. Most famously, when I was doing research, apparently that was the view Billy Graham took. So, a lot of people, Billy Graham influenced a lot of people. So it makes sense that would be a widely held belief. Now, just because it's recent doesn't mean it's wrong.
And just because it's Billy Graham.
Yeah, right.
Doesn't mean he's right.
Right,
exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that, but I do think it's important sometimes to mention that you guys have, if you've heard me at Wayfarers and sermons and stuff, I place a lot of weight on what the earliest people looking at the Bible thought, and I was telling Greg the early Christians would be on your side with this one.
I wonder, should I bring up the chiastic idea here?
Well,
Yeah,
I think that would be helpful to bring up specifically because I know when I was reading through it, because like when we brought this up, Zach, you were like, I've never heard that before.
Well, I don't think I've ever heard it said before. I think it's a word I've read before because I think Daniel is
Right.
written like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's not chronological. It's
Right.
like two mountain peaks.
Right. Well, not that specifically, but that you had never heard the first horseman being connected with Christ.
Oh, yeah.
That was
Yeah,
new
yeah,
to
yeah.
you.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And I think, I've said it several times, I don't have a lot of personal views on Revelation yet. This is what I'm hoping to form as I'm reading through it. When I first read through it, the connection, you have this first horseman who is on a white horse and has a crown as a conqueror. So you got to figure out who is that horseman. But then the next ones, we can, they're a little easier to figure out what they kind of represent. You know, the second horseman is given power to take peace away from the earth and to make people kill each other. War.
That's
you know,
referring. Yeah.
it's clearly, war and violence and all this kind of stuff. The next horseman is the one that has a pair of scales in his hand, which is a common image from the first century of
Now, from what reptile
merchants.
he took that from, we don't know.
Yeah, scales for weight, not reptilian scales. And there's even this interesting line about 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages. Do not damage oil and wine. A lot of people would believe that this is talking about economic collapse of some sort. The markets collapsing, the scales collapsing.
But thankfully, not the wine.
Not the oil and wine. Don't touch
Thank
the oil
God.
and wine. And then it goes to the fifth seal, which, the fourth seal, which is death.
Death.
Literally, it just says a rider named Death, and Hades is followed close behind him. And they're given the power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and the wild beasts of the earth. So, a lot of that sounds pretty awful. And if you're taking the view that this first horseman is some sort of antichrist character, and you think that this is the beginnings of some kind of tribulation, then that would make sense to them. This antichrist character shows up, and then followed closely behind him, you terrible
Unleashed.
things.
And
but
you didn't mention the fifth seal.
right, because there's no horseman with the fifth seal,
No
which is
horseman with
interesting.
the fifth seal.
The fifth seal is where you get the martyrs, people who've been slain because of the word of God and the testimony that they had maintained. And they call out asking God to come and judge the earth and avenge their blood. Then there's a sixth seal, which is an earthquake. The sun turns black, the moon turns red, the stars fall from the sky, the heavens are receded like a scroll, and every mountain and island is removed. And then it ends with these kings wanting the mountains and the rocks to fall and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne, from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of wrath has come, and who can withstand it? So all that to say, I've seen how some people would be like, this is a lot of terrible stuff. If you're saying the first horseman is Jesus, then are you saying God is bringing all of this horrible stuff with him? But Greg, you had an interesting way of looking at it, which you referenced earlier, which was this kind of chiastic idea.
Right. That's one possibility.
Right.
I mean, a chiasm is where you have one form of chiasm is where you have this is a literary structure. It is where you have two opposites. It's about contrast, and so you have one form of it is that the contrast is formed by placing one of those poles of opposition at the beginning and the ending, and the opposite of it in the middle. And so in this case, in other words, you have the good on the outside, and it's sandwiching the bad in the middle.
In the middle, yeah.
It's like,
So like
Where's the ugly?
you got the good.
That's
and
a different form.
and the bad. And so,
And so in this case, you have Christ entered. He goes forth to conquering and to conquer, which is what we've read about in the previous chapters about him. He is on the throne. He has ascended to heaven. His kingdom has been inaugurated. He is the king, and he goes forth conquering and to conquer. And then it ends with his And
Yeah, it says the.
And for this, we have to go back to what we said in some of our earlier sessions, where I think what you have in the book of Revelation is not a map of consecutive chronological ordering of future events, but you have these prophetic parables that describe the entire Christian era. And I think right here you have your first example. I think this is talking about the final judgment. Because listen to this language. I mean, there was a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth. The moon became like blood. The stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig trees shed their winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky split. This version says vanished, but I think I heard that a better translation was split. The sky split and like a scroll that is being rolled up. Every mountain and island was removed from its place. The kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks and the mountains, calling upon the mountains to fall on them, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne, from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of the wrath has come. Who can stand it? That's a description of the final judgment in my mind. I don't see how you could say it more strongly than that. And so what you have here is you have Christ entering the picture. You have all this turmoil in the middle, which includes war, economic collapse, and all that goes with that. You have death, famine, plague, and then you have persecution, all these negative things. And then you have Christ coming finally at the end to bring judgment upon all of that and vindication for his people.
Yeah, that is an interesting look at it. You were about to say something, Zach?
Just remembered one thing that's important to that, all the mountains and everything, islands being removed.
Right.
Is back before suspension and tires, in the ye olde era of chariots and things that didn't have suspension, is before some important person came through, you would send somebody ahead of you to make level the path. Just chunk out all the big clods and big, rocks in the road, so that whoever is traveling through on chariot, is going to have an easy ride and not like dislocate a hip on the ride through. So the idea behind this is prepare the way. The king is coming.
The idea behind which part?
The mountains and the
disappear.
islands.
Like everything's flattened out.
Everything
I
is.
can't remember, but that there is a specific passage in the older prophets talking about, it says it more literally, to make the paths level.
Isaiah. That's what.
Okay.
In fact, that was a prophecy of the coming of John the Baptist. That was his purpose, was to make way for the Lord. Yeah. And it's also connected with why the early church called themselves the way, the path.
This is
great. I'm learning all kinds of things that I didn't know before. And so the point being, for a lot of us, it is uncomfortable sometimes to think of horrible calamities being associated with God in any way, So for some people, I could see how it would be easier for them to interpret it as like, well, no, this isn't. The seal is being removed, and the first thing you have is this anti-Christ figure, this evil figure that's bringing all these calamities. But
in the Old Testament, it was always God who was sending.
And that's what I was going to say. Zach brought up a good point, because Zach walked in the room right as me and Greg were talking about this, and Zach was like, I don't know. God brings a lot of calamities on Egypt in the Exodus. And
it started with both the Israelites and the Egyptians, and not just one side.
That's true. Everybody gets the calamities.
Later on the Assyrians, on the Babylonians. Did he ever bring judgment on the Persians?
Yeah. The Medo-Persian Empire.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and so the point being, just because it's horrible things that come after this white rider comes in, doesn't mean that the white rider is not Jesus. And I think you've laid out some good evidence for your kind of position. One of the things I noticed, because you're talking about kind of sandwiching like the first verse of this chapter, or connecting the first verse of the chapter with the last verse. The specific thing is that what they are afraid of, what these kings are afraid of, it's in the very end, it says kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free. So all people, everybody, slave, free, everybody, they're hiding in caves and they're hiding in the mountains, and they're calling up and they're saying, please, mountains, just hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. So what they are afraid of is not it's judgment. It's the one sitting on the throne, who we clearly know is God, and the wrath of the Lamb, who we clearly know is associated with Jesus.
Christ.
They're not afraid of some other kind of tribulation.
Right.
And I think it needs to be said too, like whoever your heroes are, like George Washington or Gandhi or important people you like to quote, the idea here is like none of your heroes are worth a damn.
Yeah.
Jesus is the only one.
You're going to make me have to edit that out, Zach. People are going to be mad now. Maybe I'll leave it in. We'll see. You'll have to go listen and find out. But yes, none of them, everybody, great and mighty and the lowest of low, everyone is kind of terrified of what they can now see. And this is a cool thing that I didn't notice till we were talking about it, and you mentioned it, Greg, was that there's this idea with the sixth seal, which is that the heavens, it says they recede like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island is removed from its place. And so that's hard for us to understand, but you gave a good imagery, Greg, that it's kind of like the barrier between the heavens and the earth is being...
It's like a curtain.
It's like a curtain that's being pulled back. And suddenly, everyone on the earth can look up, and it says it right here. They see the him who sits on the throne. They're looking up, and it's like, oh wow, there's not a curtain anymore. We're just seeing straight into the throne room.
It's like, oh,
Yeah, you're right.
And they see that
they were right.
and they see that the great day of
Those bothersome Christians, they were right.
But won't that feel good though?
Yeah, for the Christian. Absolutely.
Finally, like you're not just talking crazy anymore.
It's like the great "I told you so" all the time.
which is what these martyrs are asking for.
Yes.
They're saying saying,
how long, Lord?
How long are we going to have to wait for you to
on?
come and avenge us? And I think this is something important. This has become very important for me to mention, and I mention it anytime it comes up, that the evil and the wicked people in the world are not going to get away with it.
They're not.
And a lot of times we have this issue with Christian forgiveness or with giving up our right to eye for an eye. If they hit me, I should be able to hit them back. And sometimes Christian people will tell them, no, turn the other cheek. And they'll be like, well, if I turn the other cheek, they're getting away with it. And it's always important for me to mention, it's like, they are not getting away with it. You are removing your...
You're not the one to.
You're not the one taking that vengeance.
Yeah.
You're letting God be the one who is going to dish it out.
He's doing it on your behalf.
Yeah, and so it's like, and Jesus even says that at different points in time. He says you're going to heap burning coals on their head by doing this. Like you are. It's not that they're getting away with it. It's just that you're a human being. It's not your job to judge. Let the one who judges rightly and correctly be the one that dishes out the vengeance. And that's what these martyrs are doing. They're asking God. Can you avenge us?
Also, another thing that I hear Christians say quite often that kind of bothers me is that God has unconditional love for all people. It's not unconditional. There is a condition. I mean, faith in the Lord Jesus Christ is a condition, isn't it? Isn't that a condition?
Well, I guess the question would be, is that a condition for his love or a condition for salvation?
Okay.
You know,
But I
'cause
get
God,
what you mean.
God
yeah.
loved the world, is what John 3:16 says. You know,
Yeah.
and I think that includes everybody. So the love is precondition, and I do think that probably still is.
How about the
you know.
experiencing of that love is
And-
conditional?
But I think here too, further than that, Jesus shows so much love here to these martyrs. They're not just, hey, I'm here. Do you even remember me? But Jesus is, wait a little while longer. And then look what he does. He gives them like the highest honor that heaven can bestow.
Yeah. Yeah. Verse 11 says, each of them is given a white robe, and they are told to wait just a little while longer until the full number of their fellow servants, their brothers and sisters, were killed just as they had been. So there's this like period of waiting until you get all of the people who need to be martyred in this.
On a kind of side note here, I mean, it's not the main purpose of why this is being written, but we might be able to draw a conclusion, or at least recognize that these souls, they're called souls. That's interesting. They are alive. They are conscious. They can talk to the Lord. This is after death. And so the idea of soul sleep is not biblical. They're not unconscious. And it also shows that the soul can be separated from the body.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody asked, me one time, what's a soul anyway? I mean, and I said, well, it's what's left after the body dies. Everything else is gone. The thing that's left. Now, a lot of people today are naturalist, I guess you call it. Is that the word?
Materialist is the other term.
Materialist, and believe that we're only made of chemicals and physical material, and that our sense of having a soul is actually an illusion made by these chemical processes going on in our brain. But the scriptures do not teach that, and Christians have believed that there's a soul that's, it shouldn't be separated. It wasn't intended to be separated from the body. God didn't create us that way, but it can be separated from the body. And that's what we call death.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like an Edgar Allan Poe story.
And that's a good teaser, actually, because I know we can probably talk a little bit more about this, but there's other martyrs that come up later on in the book, and it might be a good time to continue the conversation a little bit more on what that means. But I think the point being, there does seem to be some evidence that this is talking about like a entire 100-foot view leading all the way up until the judgment, which is different. Again, I'm pointing out how many of us may have read this or heard of it before. A lot of us are taught to read the book of Revelation chronologically, one thing happening right after the other, happening right after the other. And so in chapter 7, we're going to get to the 144,000 that are sealed. And in chapter 8, we're finally going to get the 7th seal. Because it's also important to mention, at the very beginning of this chapter, we hear about 7 seals, but we have only heard about 6 of them so far. And so the point being, I've been very motivated by what you're saying, Greg, about this sort of. You used a new term today that I don't think you've used yet. I liked a lot, which you call them prophetic parables. I like that a lot. In that, like when Jesus tells stories, like a famous one is he tells a story of a woman who loses a coin and goes to find it, and then he tells a story of a man who loses a sheep and goes to find it. Nobody reads that and thinks that this is happening in the same timeline. like first the woman loses a coin, then she finds it. Then after she finds the coin, a few
Right.
hours later, the man loses a sheep and he finds it. And it's like, no, you understand that those two stories are talking about the same
There's a
concept.
whole section of Matthew where he's one parable after another.
which are just constant. It's almost like
It's
the
the
same
same
story over and over again, just from a different
Slightly
view.
different angle, yeah.
And that's what we said is a thing that you can kind of see here in Revelation if you're looking at it this way, which is that you're getting different views of some of the same passages.
Does that mean you're not sure about that?
The only thing I'd say.
Oh, we should say to our audience who's just listening, he just nodded his back and forth head thing that says, I'm not so sure about that.
Well, no, I'm still thinking about that because what we talked about before is like pretty new, and I hadn't had time to digest yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Then that's the big thing. That's the big thing that I think me and Zach are experiencing as we're going through this. Greg, you've thought about this for a while and you've formed your opinions on a lot of it. I'm not trying to say you're old, but
Go ahead.
you've had a few more years to think about it than we have.
All right, why don't you come hiking with us this weekend and see how much further you can get than Greg? Then we'll talk about who's older.
I don't know, man. The back of my foot, did I hit the back of my foot last time we went out? I can't remember, but
I don't know.
it was sore for
Really?
a couple days, yeah. Like I banged it or something. I don't remember doing that.
Let's just say my soul is a lot older than my body, I've always said.
You have an old soul.
An old soul.
Does your soul need a nap?
I think so.
Soul napping?
And so that's always my encouragement to anybody when they're reading the Bible. I really think that all of the Bible is what could be termed meditation literature, which is that it's literature that you have to sit, you have to marinate, you have to meditate on it. Psalm 1 even talks about a man who thinks about the law day and night. So you got to think about it a long time. So maybe do that with this passage. Been presented with a few views on it, a few of the ways people look at it. Marinate on it and try to decide for yourself. Who do you think the four horsemen are? And what do you think some of this represents?
Hello, my name is Messiah Yeshua. You killed my saints. Prepare to die.
Hey everybody, thanks for checking out this podcast episode. If you want to help us produce it and the other podcasts like it that we do at Wayfarers, I'd encourage you to visit us at wayfarerscc.com/give. I also want to give a shout out to Mid-South Christian College. Myself and our podcasting professor, Greg Waddell, are professors at the school. And if you want to learn more about the Bible, prepare yourself for ministry, Mid-South is one of the best places to do it. Check it out at midsouthchristian.edu. Thanks.